Mara lived in a quiet neighborhood where people kept to themselves. She was known as kind but nervous, always checking locks and looking over her shoulder. No one worried much about her until the night she began pounding on her neighbor's door, screaming words that made no sense. "Someone is trapped inside my house. Please, you have to listen." Her voice cracked with desperation. Her hands trembled. But when her neighbor opened the door and listened carefully, he heard nothing unusual. Just the wind and distant traffic. "There's no one there, Mara," he said gently. She grabbed his arm, eyes wild with fear. "Please. I'm not making this up." But as he tried to calm her, something strange happened. As they pulled her away from his doorstep, a faint knock echoed from inside her house. Soft, deliberate, impossible to ignore. By morning, Mara's brother arrived. His face was tight with embarrassment as he apologized to the neighbors gathered outside. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "She's been under a lot of stress lately. Moving to a new place, living alone. It's been hard on her." He spoke as though she weren't standing right there, trembling and exhausted. The neighbors nodded with pity in their eyes. They had seen this before. People who couldn't handle the pressure of life. But Mara shook her head firmly. "This only started after I moved into that house. I was fine before." Her brother sighed. "Mara, please." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that sent chills down his spine. "It only cries after midnight." Her brother froze. There was something in her eyes, something he hadn't seen before. Not madness. Fear. The landlord arrived within the hour, calm and professional. He was a large man with kind eyes and a patient smile. He had owned the building for years and knew how to handle difficult situations. "Let's take a look together," he said reassuringly. He and Mara's brother walked through every room, checking closets, behind furniture, under the bed. Everything seemed perfectly normal. The house was small, clean, and quiet. But at the end of the hallway, they found a door Mara's brother hadn't noticed before. It was locked, with no handle, just a keyhole. "What's in there?" he asked. The landlord's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just storage. Old tenants' junk. Nothing important." Mara's brother reached for the door. "Can we open it?" The landlord stepped in front of him quickly. "No key on me. I'll check later." But Mara noticed something. The landlord's hands were shaking. That night, Mara couldn't sleep. She sat in the hallway, staring at the locked door, waiting. The house was silent. Even the usual creaks and whispers of an old building seemed to hold their breath. She checked her watch. 11:58. Midnight approached like a shadow creeping closer. And then, at exactly 12, it came, a faint, broken cry. Soft at first, like a child waking from a nightmare. It echoed from behind the locked door, muffled but unmistakable. Mara's heart pounded. She stood slowly, barely breathing. The cry came again, louder this time. Desperate. And then, the doorknob began to turn. Slowly. Deliberately. Someone was trying to open it from the inside. Mara stumbled backward, her scream caught in her throat. The doorknob stopped moving. Silence returned. But she knew what she had seen. The next morning, Mara showed her brother the recording she had made on her phone. She had been prepared this time. "Listen," she said, hands shaking as she pressed play. But when the recording played, there was nothing. Just static and the hum of the refrigerator in the background. Her brother looked at her with sad eyes. "Mara, I heard it. I swear I did." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe you should come stay with me for a while." She pulled away, anger rising in her chest. "I'm not crazy." That night, she stayed awake again, waiting. And this time, the crying didn't come from behind the door. It came from inside the walls. Closer. Moving. Following her as she walked through the house. Mara's neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Chen, stopped her in the hallway the next afternoon. She spoke quietly, glancing around as though afraid of being overheard. "I heard something the other night," she admitted. "Something faint. Like a child crying." Mora's heart leaped. "You believe me?" Mrs. Chen hesitated, then nodded. "I don't know what's going on, but your fear is real. I can see that." For the first time in days, Mora felt hope. Someone finally believed her. But the next morning, when Mora approached Mrs. Chen again, the woman's face went blank. "I never said that," she said coldly. "I think you're mistaken." Mora stared at her in disbelief. "But you told me." "I said nothing." Mrs. Chen hurried away, refusing to meet her eyes. Something had changed. Someone had gotten to her. Desperate for answers, Mora asked the landlord about the previous tenant. "Oh, she just moved out," he said casually. "Found a better place. Happens all the time." But later that day, another neighbor pulled Mora aside. His name was Mr. Diaz, and he had lived in the building for over a decade. "The last tenant didn't just leave," he whispered. "She disappeared. One day she was here, the next, gone. No goodbye, no forwarding address." Mora's blood ran cold. "Did anyone check on her?" Mr. Diaz shook his head slowly. "No one ever went into that locked room. The landlord said it was private storage. We didn't question it." He looked at her with haunted eyes. "Maybe we should have." That night, the scratching began. It started soft, like fingernails dragging slowly across wood. It came from behind the locked door, steady and deliberate. Mora stood frozen in the hallway, listening. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, desperate. Without thinking, Mora stepped closer. She pressed her hand against the door and scratched back. The sound stopped instantly. Silence filled the hallway. And then, slowly, the scratching began again, following the same rhythm Mora had used. Someone was responding. Mora's breath caught in her throat. She leaned closer, pressing her ear against the door. A weak, broken voice whispered from the other side. "Help me." It was real. It was a child. And she was trapped. Mora stumbled backward, her mind racing. She wasn't crazy. She had been right all along. Mora's brother came over the next evening. She could see the frustration in his eyes. He was tired of the calls, the worry, the fear that his sister was losing her grip on reality. "I think you need to see someone," he said carefully. "This isn't healthy." "I'm not imagining this," Mora shouted. They argued in the hallway, voices rising. He threatened to take her to a hospital, to get her evaluated. But then, in the middle of his sentence, he stopped. His face went pale. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Mora's heart pounded. "Hear what?" He held up a hand, silencing her. They both stood perfectly still. And then it came, a faint, unmistakable cry from behind the locked door. Her brother's eyes widened in horror. He turned slowly toward the door, finally understanding. Mora wasn't crazy. Something was really in there. This time, they searched together. Mora's brother was serious now, no longer dismissive. He checked every corner, every closet, every possible hiding place. The landlord arrived shortly after, summoned by the brothers' urgent call. But when they approached the locked door again, the landlord's entire demeanor changed. "I told you, it's just storage," he said, stepping in front of the door. His voice was sharper now, less friendly. "Then open it," Mora's brother demanded. "I don't have the key." "Then break it down." The landlord's jaw tightened. "No. That's private property. You have no right." Mora watched his hands carefully. They were trembling again, clenched into fists. His eyes darted between them and the door, calculating, afraid. He was hiding something. And now they both knew it. That night, Mora set up recording devices all over the house. Her phone, a borrowed camera, even an old tape recorder. She would capture proof, undeniable, permanent proof. She stayed awake, watching the clock tick toward midnight. When it struck 12, the crying began again, clearer than ever before. This time, the recordings captured it. Every sob, every desperate plea. But there was something else on the audio. Footsteps. Heavy footsteps moving inside the room. Not the light steps of a child. These were heavier, deliberate, pacing back and forth. Mara's blood turned to ice as she listened to the playback. Someone else was in there. Someone who walked. Someone who waited. And whoever it was, they were not a prisoner. Mara and her brother sat together, replaying the recording over and over. The child's crying was unmistakable. But the footsteps were what terrified them most. "Those aren't a kid's footsteps," her brother whispered. They matched the rhythm of an adult. Slow, heavy, purposeful. Mara felt her stomach twist. Someone else is in there with her. Her brother stared at the door, his face pale. Who? They sat in silence, the weight of the question pressing down on them. Whoever was in that room wasn't trapped. They were guarding something. Or someone. And the crying child wasn't alone. The realization hit them both at the same time. Someone else is in there. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The next morning, the landlord appeared at Mara's door. He didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped inside, his face tight with urgency. "You need to leave," he said flatly. Mara crossed her arms. "Excuse me. I'll refund everything. Your deposit, the rent, everything. Just pack your things and go." His voice was desperate now, almost pleading. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Why?" Mara demanded. "Because I'm asking you to. Please." She stepped closer, searching his face. "What are you hiding?" He turned and left without answering. That night, the crying turned into screaming. It was raw, terrified, echoing through the walls. The sound of someone who had given up hope. Mara covered her ears, tears streaming down her face. And she knew, time was running out. Mara's brother stayed over that night. He needed to hear it for himself again, to be certain. The screaming came just after midnight. Loud, clear, impossible to deny. He sat frozen, his face pale with shock. But then, something strange happened. The landlord's car pulled up outside. They heard his footsteps approaching the building. And the moment he entered, the screaming stopped. Complete silence. Mara and her brother exchanged a horrified glance. "Why does it go quiet when he's here?" her brother whispered. The answer was too terrible to say out loud. Whoever was in that room. They were afraid of him. The child knew when he was near. And she went silent to protect herself. Because he was the one she feared most. 15. Desperation drove Mara to search every inch of the house. She pulled at loose floorboards, checked behind baseboards, tore through drawers. And then, hidden behind a loose panel near the kitchen, she found it. An old, rusted key. Her hands shook as she grabbed it and ran to the locked door. This had to be it. This had to be the answer. She slid the key into the lock, her heart pounding. It didn't fit. The key was too small, the wrong shape entirely. Hope died in her chest. This wasn't the key. Which meant the real one was still out there, hidden somewhere she hadn't looked. She stepped back, defeated. And then she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Fresh scratch marks on the outside of the door. Someone had been trying to get in. Mara woke in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps. Not the muffled footsteps from inside the locked room. These were in her house. In the hallway. She sat up slowly, heart hammering in her chest. The footsteps were deliberate, unhurried. Whoever it was wasn't trying to hide. She grabbed her phone and crept to the door of her bedroom. The hallway was empty. But the locked door at the end stood slightly ajar. It had been opened. Mara's breath caught. Fresh marks lined the doorframe, as though someone had forced it open, and then closed it again. Someone had been inside. and they had left just as quietly as they came. The next night, Mara pressed her ear against the locked door, listening. The child's voice came through, clearer than ever before. "He comes at night." The words were soft, trembling with fear. Mara's heart broke. "Who?" she whispered back. No answer. But the terror in that small voice told her everything. The child wasn't just afraid of being trapped. She was afraid of someone specific. Someone who visited her in the darkness. And Mara realized something that chilled her to the bone. The danger wasn't just inside the room. It walked freely through the house. It had a key. And it had been watching them all along. Mara couldn't stay silent any longer. She confronted the landlord in front of the other tenants, her voice shaking with fury. "There is a child locked in that room, and you know it." The landlord laughed, but it sounded forced. "You're being ridiculous. Then prove me wrong. Open the door." He shifted uncomfortably. The neighbors watched, uncertain. Then Mrs. Chen stepped forward. "I heard it too," she said quietly. "The crying. I lied before because I was scared. But she's telling the truth." The landlord's face darkened. He stepped closer to Mara, his voice low and threatening. "Stay out of things you don't understand." The words weren't a warning. They were a threat. And everyone there felt it. The group made a decision. Tomorrow, they would open the door together. No more excuses. No more delays. The landlord said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. That night, Mara waited for the crying to begin. But it didn't. The house was completely silent. Too silent. No footsteps. No scratching. No crying. It was as though the room had been emptied. Mara sat in the hallway, staring at the door, her stomach twisting with dread. Something changed. She whispered. Had they been too late? Had the child been moved? Or worse, had something happened to her? The silence felt like a tomb. Mara sat outside the locked door all night, refusing to leave. She pressed her hand against the wood, waiting. And then, just before dawn, a soft voice whispered from inside. "He's here." Mara's blood turned to ice. Footsteps approached from inside the room. Not running. Not frantic. Slow. Deliberate. Coming closer to the door. Mara scrambled backward, her heart pounding. The footsteps stopped just on the other side. Someone was standing there, listening. Waiting. The next morning, everyone gathered in the hallway. Mara, her brother, the landlord, and several neighbors. The air was thick with tension. The landlord stood firmly in front of the door, his arms crossed. "No one is opening that door," he said, his voice hard. Mara stepped forward. "We have to." "No." The neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Fear held them in place. What if Mara was wrong? What if this really was madness? For the first time, doubt crept back in. The landlord saw it. He straightened, confident again. But Mara looked at the door. Then at the others. And she made a decision. Without waiting for permission, Mara grabbed a heavy lamp from the hallway table and swung it at the door. Once. The wood splintered. Twice. The landlord shouted for her to stop, but no one moved to help him. Again. The door cracked open under the force. Dust spilled out. Darkness breathed into the hallway. And inside, huddled in the corner, was a small, trembling figure. A child. Thin. Pale. Terrified. She looked up at them with wide, hollow eyes. And the moment she saw the landlord, she started screaming. The child's finger pointed directly at the landlord, her voice raw and broken. "He comes at night." The room was small, filthy, with a mattress on the floor and empty food containers scattered around. Signs of long-term captivity. The landlord's face went pale. He stepped back, shaking his head. "This isn't." "Don't move," Mara's brother said, blocking his path. The landlord turned and tried to run, but the neighbors grabbed him, holding him in place. The child sobbed, covering her face. And Mara knelt beside her, whispering softly, "You're safe now." Under pressure from the police, the truth finally came out. The child's father had been a tenant years ago. He'd fallen behind on rent and disappeared one night. The landlord claimed he'd skipped town. But the truth was darker. The landlord had hidden the child after her father vanished, keeping her locked away, feeding her in secret. No one had questioned the locked door. No one had checked. Years had passed. The child had grown up in that room, alone, terrified. And the landlord had convinced everyone that nothing was wrong. No one ever questioned the locked door. The detective said quietly. The police took the landlord away in handcuffs. The child was carried out gently, wrapped in a blanket, finally free. Mara stood in the hallway, exhausted, her hands still trembling. Her brother placed a hand on her shoulder. "You were right. You saved her." The neighbors whispered apologies, ashamed they hadn't believed her sooner. Mara wasn't unstable. She wasn't crazy. She was the only one who had listened. As the house emptied and silence returned, Mara took one last look at the open door. And then, a faint knock echoed through the hallway. This time from inside the walls. Mara froze. Some doors, once opened, reveal more than we're ready to face. And some truths refuse to stay buried.